All right, folks, I want to welcome our guest to the show. It is Greg from the Great American Landscape. Welcome back to the show, man.
Thanks. I was really looking forward to this, quite honestly, and I've been, as you say, jumping in and doing a lot of research and getting ready. I like this subject. This, and it's funny is we've talked about a lot of things, but never really and extensively on your main show,
I know it's always about
Squatch.
something else, but we are going to talk about Bigfoot tonight. So I was really glad to
Yay.
get you back on the show. I've missed these conversations, and when you suggested this topic, I was like, well, we can definitely do that. So one of the things I know we're going to get into, well, a lot of the things we're going to get into, is some of the things that have bugged both you and I about Bigfoot and Bigfoot research and Sasquatchery in general over these last few years. So let's just get right into it. Start. I know you've got a list that you've brought with you, so let's kind of get into the list and tear into some of these subjects one by one.
Okay, and I'll try not to use words like it's squatchy and stuff like that, little things that get on my nerves, even though it's kind of funny. It's usually I've got my Bigfoot T-shirt on. What you can't see is it says "winner of the hide and seek contest," and I get a lot of comments on this when I'm walking around with it on, and people are like, "That's great," because it kind of plays to the point of where is he? And I've been binging a lot of your shows and a lot of the TV shows on the subject lately, and I thought we got to talk about this. And I've got some big issues. I want to be a believer. I'm going to put it that way. Use the X file lines. I want to believe, but you've been using a football analogy, and what was your thought on that?
Basically, well, it came from Pat Turner from Squatch Talk. Pat basically during one of the shows we did towards the end of the year last year. Pat was like, the Patterson-Gimlin film put us on the 5 yard line, and we've kind of been stuck there ever since 1967. So I've said that multiple times on the show and used that analogy, sort of that we're on the 5 yard line in Bigfoot research, and frankly, I don't see it moving anytime soon.
Yeah, and I see it quite a bit differently. I think the PG film, which quite honestly, I never heard that term PG until everybody's using just nobody can say those two words together. I guess they're tripping over it. The PG film, I think, put us on the 50-yard line. It's it's a video. Is it real? So it's kind of a 50-50 thing for me, right? We're in the middle. Which way are we going to go? But I actually think we've progressed and then regressed. I think we're on like our own 15. I don't think we're on the 15 about to score because I think the Bigfoot community in some ways has screwed themselves with just the way they go about it, the way they present themselves. I don't think it comes off as credible sometimes. I don't think they mean to be that way. I don't even know if they know they're shooting themselves in the foot sometimes. And we'll talk about a little bit about DNA, films, big giant leaps of faith on things. Um, so yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at. I think we retreated a lot, and I'm hoping we can make it up with a more scientific approach than a lot of what I've seen. One of your recent shows had a guy on that was talking about um, a new part two of a documentary that's coming out that he wants people to donate money to. Found the guy very interesting. A lot of talk about DNA, which we'll hope something comes out of that. Because when I visited the on my show, Great America, you got me. It's the American Landscape. That actually, the Great American Landscape actually has a good ring to it. Maybe I should update it. Um, we went to the Taurus or Taurus Capri Bigfoot Museum in Fulton, California, and it's struggling a little bit. I hear now. We visited before COVID, and it's a tiny little place on the edge of Fulton, California, up in some redwoods. Um, and he told me about a book which I haven't had time to read yet, called Nature of the Beast. Now, it was written by Brian Sykes, and if anybody knows or have heard about the seven daughters of Eve, he's the one through DNA discovered that we all are connected to that mitochondrial Eve. So he's got some, what would you say, science behind him, some credibility, probably is the word I was looking for. So that should be an interesting read. And he's kind of a guy who probably, when he speaks about DNA, people listen. It's kind of like that. Was that Merrill Lynch? What was that old commercial when Merrill Lynch speaks? People listen. That kind of a thing. So that's on my to-do list. Another one he gave me too was Abominable Snowman, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, O-Man, Grassman, Long Name, and Skunk Apes by Ivan T. Sanderson. It's supposed to be it's a book written in the 60s, but very pivotal. I haven't read it yet. Have you heard of this one? Have you read it?
Definitely. It's sort of like the Bible in some people's minds when
Mhm.
it comes to Bigfoot research. So
I see. I see. So here's some of my questions. I keep hearing things as I watch. Like I said, I've been binge watching Finding Bigfoot because it had been a while since I watched it. Um, I'd been told Bobo was sick, that he'd even been poisoned at one point. I don't know if that's true. Came from a third party who was supposed to be in the know. But when you see him presently, he's lost a lot of weight. Good luck. I mean, good for him. I'd sure like to lose that kind of weight. But I watched the first or second season, and I thought, I'm just going to jump to 12. There was a newest season on the streaming device I use to see if anything has changed. Not really. They're still making these giant leaps. They were actually in town for the PG like 50th anniversary up there in I almost said Willow Creek. I don't think that's right. Is it Willow Creek?
Bluff Creek.
Where they Bluff Creek, whatever the little town is, the big squatchy gathering. And I found that nothing's really changed. They're making these big giant leaps, and things would come out like Bigfoot is attracted to the color blue, and this is a good gifting thing, right? I'm like, well, how do you know this? Because even you say you've gifted, and I have a kind of I don't say an issue with gifting, but there's a lot of wild animals out there that will take things. Raccoons. I used to own a raccoon, didn't know I wasn't supposed to till after I had it. Very good at taking things. In fact, they're little thieves. Little, they're very good. And when they make these absolutes, it just drives me crazy because here's guys that have said, and this covers all the shows, because Expedition, that's a attraction, sorry, Expedition Bigfoot is probably the one I have a little more respect for because I like their approach. The guy that's, let's say overseeing it is tracking sightings, putting it into spreadsheets, figuring out where they supposedly are during certain seasons, and then attacking it that way. To me, that seems like a pretty logical approach. But even those guys make stupid decisions. Oh, we see something. Let's run. He's just violated all the rules, right? Let's run after it. Let's do this. Oh, there's a teepee. That's obviously Bigfoot. Is it? Have you ever seen Bigfoot make this teepee? How do you know this teepee thing is a Bigfoot? I and then there was one I heard last night, I think for the first time. It was a whispering thing. First, it was like, "Hey, man," the scientist lady, she's not an anthropologist, she's a field biologist, I think. She said, "I was clear as day. I heard, yeah, man, or yay, man. Oh, that's no Bigfoots do that all the time. How the hell do you know that? If we had so much evidence, all this supposed evidence, we would we would be seeing this guy now. Jane, Goodall, or what was the other one? Diane Fossey types would be sitting with him and studying him. I mean, let's put this in perspective. They say they've been see what's 50. I don't do the math. 50 years since the Gimli film. These guys say they've been tracking it, squatching for 25 years or more. The first guy, the first Westerner to see a gorilla was like in 1850s, I think. Okay, so honestly, we judge a lot of our history by the Western world, even though the Eastern world has probably seen these things, or the African world has seen these things forever. But to the Western guy, 1850s. Silverbacks weren't even known until 1902. So, yeah, 40 years, 50 years before the Sasquatch was found. But we're laying around watching what they do. We're observing them. We're teaching them to sign. But we still can't find a fucking sorry, can we curse on this show? The Sasquatch, it doesn't make any sense. But I do want to believe. I believe he can exist. I really do. But this guy can't be that elusive. And then you have to get into all the, well, he's part of the UFO phenomenon, or he's a shapeshifter. I'd heard that the first time at the Tourist Museum up north here in California. I'm like, really? They're shapeshifters? I didn't know that. And these things are spoken with absolutes, you know. But I'm like, where's all the scat, you know? Where's the bones? Now, you know, and people try to say, oh, in fact, this one I mentioned to an anthropologist when I was doing a dinosaur thing, something about, you know, oh, I heard it's not very common to find bear skulls or skeletons. And one guy says, oh, I saw one X amount of, you know, I was doing my field research. They're out there, but it's like we want to kind of snake through some of these. Oh, you never see bears out, you know, dead in the woods, but you'll find many people that say they have. But the researchers, a lot of times, they want to leave things on the table and not discuss and put that into the mix. And that's what I find really, I don't know, frustrating. I mean, how do we know that? And this would be a large group of people with hypertrichosis, or however you pronounce that. You know what that is, right? When they're totally covered with what werewolf syndrome, I think it's called. Because I was looking at that Gimli film again, and there's not much facial features. I mean, you see eyes, and it looks like it's all fur from there. And I like Harry from Harry and the Hendersons. That's my favorite Sasquatch. Expressions, you can see the face, but he's still a big furry guy. But that's really not what the Patterson film shows. And a lot of other photographs tend to show something that you can barely see a mouth, you just see eyes. They're always out of focus. I don't think I've ever seen an in focus one. Now, I know it was a Patterson, he fell off his horse or something, he was getting the camera ready, but he got it fairly stable. And a lot of these ones, you know, the camera's going all over, and I've heard people say, well, they're probably panicking. Okay, fine. I'm on the monorail in Las Vegas at a recent convention, and I saw a particular flight coming out or coming in to the airport, and I'm going to go blank on the name of the flight. They're white planes with a red stripe, and they fly from Las Vegas Airport to Area 51. Now, Area 51 is known. It's not, you know, Janus. Thank you.
Yeah, the Janus flights.
Once I found it, I stabilized on it. And I was, you could say I was panicking because I wanted to see it. And I'm like, oh, I got to get this on film. This is cool. I've seen it 100 times when I've been in Vegas, but, you know, and I steadied myself up. It can be done. I don't know why everybody acts like this is such a hard thing to do, to get a steady shot of anything, whether it's the UFO, the Bigfoot, the chupacabra, the, you know, you name the beast that we can't seem to get a freaking decent footage on. And everybody is carrying a camera these days. It's not like you've got to go get a roll of film, be prepared, know what you're doing. You can just point and shoot it. Why are we still 50 years later, 25 for all these supposedly, I absolutely know it's Bigfoot, I've seen him. Where was your camera? Where was your recording device that night? You know, this is where stuff starts to fall apart for me.
Well, let's go. Before we get too far down the rabbit hole, let me kind of go down the list a little bit, and let's start off with the Finding Bigfoot stuff, right? Okay. I tend to agree with. I've never watched the show, honestly. I have to admit that. Most people find it interesting that I do a Bigfoot podcast, and I've never watched one episode. Maybe a couple of times I watched Finding Bigfoot back in the day, but I wasn't an avid watcher, and I've never watched Expedition Bigfoot. You know, I've hung out with Russell Accord. I hung out with him just a few weeks ago. He's a super nice guy, really knowledgeable, just fun guy to be around, right? I've never watched the show. I've met Maria. I've met him. I've met Ronnie, but never watched the show.
And I've had to watch one of the shows. Do that one.
Well, that's what people tell me. That's what people have said. They take a very scientific approach. Maria is a scientist. She does her thing.
Yes.
So you have these people running around doing their thing, right? And let's go back to the Finding Bigfoot. I've had Cliff on the show before. Cliff and I've had some great conversations about Bigfoot and just stuff in general. Never talked to Bobo, but I've known people who have talked to him, and I'm about to we're doing a conference here in July. Him, Matt Moneymaker, and Renee Holland from Finding Bigfoot will be there. So I'll get to have a conversation with all three of those guys. So here's the thing about television. Obviously, some of the things you describe are obviously for television. There's producers involved. Anytime you're doing television, you're in the business, right? You know what you got to do to keep people interested. So they got to do these. It's got to be at night. They've got to run towards whatever's happening, the whoop or the holler or the tree knock. So I get that. I do think that a lot of people have told me that it appears that Expedition Bigfoot are trying to use some tools that maybe haven't been employed before. I've done entire shows recently about drones and using drones. I think they had an episode where they tried to use drones to possibly get footage of these things.
They had a tethered drone. I think they were doing, I don't remember if it was infrared or some spectrum, thing, but yes. So the tethered drone could stay up much longer, the average drone's 20, 30 minutes, I think, of flight time. That's what mine is. So yeah, they seem to be trying a much more scientific approach. So there's only one scientist on the show, and she sometimes has a lot of issues with the way the other guys act or approach or whatever. Yes.
But with
So
I was going to say with Finding Bigfoot, when I had the conversation with Cliff recently, he said that one of the very first episodes, that infamous one where Moneymaker's going, there's a squatching on the hill or whatever. He said they caught one on thermal that night. It was either a giant naked man in the middle of the woods where they were filming trying to hoax them, or it was a Bigfoot. That's Cliff's analogy on the situation. And I believe Cliff to be a very honest guy. I don't think he has any reason to lie. I don't think he would lie about anything, frankly, from what I know of him. But they are convinced that that's what they got. Now, is that what it was? I don't know. I wasn't there. But I think they were trying to do the right thing. But I certainly get your trepidation about it, because the show was on 12 season and it's now famously, not Finding Bigfoot is usually what I hear when people talk about Finding Bigfoot, because they did find some things and maybe tracks and foot castings and stuff like that Cliff considers to be real evidence. But outside of that, right, I don't think there's any much more of a there. And I think Expedition Bigfoot is probably headed down the same path. What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say, I'll speak to the thermal, of course, because you can't get a true image on the thermal. You're seeing an outline. And I've wondered about when any of these shows show up to an area, is it pretty well known they're there? They've booked hotels. They try to come in on the sly, but Finding Bigfoot, they have a town meeting to get people to raise their hand and say, and of course, 75% of the audience always raises their hands and says they've seen one. I can raise my hand. I think I've told the story about seeing a UFO. Didn't say I saw a flying saucer. I saw something flying I couldn't identify, doing weird things that, and being in the Air Force, didn't seem like, the way aircraft would fly. And this was way back before, stealth or F-22s and some of these that can do some pretty amazing things. But I leave it open. With the Bigfoot, and then after doing the show with the dinosaur, the anthropologist, and talking about foot casts and things, and them talking about the science of why they think sometimes casts don't look like what you think they look like. Because, of course, I had to bring up, were dinosaurs and men ever, here at the same time? They always say no, of course. Science doesn't believe that. Yet there are what some people consider evidence of footprints in footprints. And then their scientific explanation goes to the point of like shrinkage and different things, or did he get a full push and how it could look and blah, blah, blah. And they're quick to dismiss it. I get it. But some of the stuff we're done here, even wood knocks. I mean, you live in kind of a woody area. There's a lot of things to be heard that on a general night you probably couldn't explain without a lot of really in-depth research to figure out, well, the wind blows, the thing snaps, it sounds like this, an acorn falls, you think it's, something's been thrown at you. I don't know. Some of this stuff just seems really, really far fetched, and it's become the absolute. Wood knocks are the absolute. This howl, the howl. If it seems like the Sierra sounds are the kind of the quintessential. We know this is something that we can't identify. It sounds the closest to what most people say Bigfoot sound like. Instead of going out there with Bobo or whoever and yelling some sound they think sounds like a squatch, why not play the Sierra sounds and let that do the talking, if you will? Now, I listened to that show that you recently had about the Sierra sounds, found it completely fascinating until I couldn't decide who was talking, because I guess the recording had the guy that was recording it talking at the same time. And at a certain point, it became very unclear. And what I have found, because I've done a lot of ghost walks and watched enough Zach Bagans to see how they play things, hearing something in person versus hearing it through the TV or a secondary recording sometimes changes things quite a bit. It's not like seeing it or seeing or hearing it in first person. So I'll give a break sometimes for those things, but I don't understand if they want to do this scientifically. Stop yelling, because quite honestly, it's like you barking at your dog. Dog looks at you like you're an idiot. You know, he might bark back. They might get some other animals to make some noise. I don't think they're really doing anything but looking like, I don't want to call them fools, but it just doesn't seem like a scientific approach. And it's not very, the approach doesn't seem to be very scientific, you know. That's kind of my problem. And sort of like Ancient Aliens, which again, I love the show, but everything's always aliens. On these shows, if they can't explain it, the scientist says, well, it's unexplained. To them, it's always Bigfoot. Well, Bigfoot's known to do this. Every new show or every few new shows, something new comes up and scientists, or they say they know that Bigfoot does this. But there's not a consensus. You know, they I think they like to think there's a consensus. Then I heard they think they bury their own. Well, wouldn't you find like a come across a graveyard at some point then? I mean, we're raised to such a level of intelligence. I say we, they assume they eat meat. Why? They could be vegetarians for all we know. I mean, there's just so many absolutes that I have a trouble with. And then I went to the hunting one, because I really do believe no one, no film, no picture is ever going to be solving this absolute. The scientific community, for whatever reason, doesn't seem to want to jump in on this. The guy I interviewed up at this museum went to school to be an anthropologist. He wanted to write his dissertation on Bigfoot, and they told him no. So when science tells you no, it kind of turns you off. I had an art instructor do that to me. Came by, I was working a piece of clay, smashed it. You can do better than that. I was like an 18-year-old impressionable kid, you know. That's not the way to inspire someone to be more creative. And you know, this is kind of where I go. You know, it's like there was one with the hunting one where they thought Bigfoot took the dog. What happens when your dog is attacked by someone they don't know? They yelp, they growl, they scream. What, Bigfoot go and cover his mouth, and you know, I mean, they make big leaps, and then they end up finding the dog by the end of the show. It just went under a building. And those guys always say they're going to help somebody. Almost at the end of every show, there's no answer, so there's no help. They haven't scared anything away. Yeah, and they do stupid stuff like, Johnny, yeah, oh yeah, Johnny, go ahead. One something just walked by me. Well, stay there. Maybe it'll circle back around. What would most hunters do? Something go, military people. They're gonna go after that. And I think the head guy of the hunting Bigfoot seems to see. I mean, he'll walk up and seem like a nice guy, but then later he comes off as kind of this arrogant backwoods southern, I'm going to kill this thing and bag it and hang it by its feet and bring it into town. And though I do believe that may be what it's going to take for any scientist to believe, really, I mean, come on, science just doesn't want to accept this stuff. They're opening up to UFOs, which is surprising, the Tic Tac videos and all that. but the big man just doesn't seem to be accepted. Though, I don't believe in giants now. I think giants have existed. A little bit that is biblical faith out of the book. We've been taught. Um, the whole Nephilim thing, that could all be very true. We don't know. Today, I think we would have seen these people. I do believe there could be wood apes. There could be orangutans. After watching the Tiger King and seeing what those different guys have brought into this country or rescued from other people brought into this country, how do we not know? Maybe not dissimilar to the newer versions of the Planet of the Apes. When they got some intelligence, they went off, they lived in the woods. For the most part, people never saw them unless they intruded on their area. I think that could happen when you really realize how vast this country is. And I know, living in Southern California, I live in what I don't call a city. It's in their, suburbia. My cousins in like Missouri, South Dakota, they think I live in this big city. I'd say, no, big cities like San Francisco, New York, Chicago. To me, those are cities. I'm just in suburbia that just never stops. Though 10, 20 miles from here, people are getting jumped by cougars, mountain lions, as they're bicycling in the local mountains. We got bears. I actually tried to look up. We were talking about, let's find some modern, what's going on right now in the Bigfoot world. Everything I found was the latest 5 videos you got to see. Then I typed in my local mountains. Yes, there's been some sightings. Of course, nothing on film, nothing on camera. It's all stories. And I think it's easy to work yourself up into that. I mean, how you've been to campfires as a kid? Somebody tells a story, got you all worked up, and now everything you hear is whatever has been told, right?
Yeah, I think
I don't
one
know.
of the things I've said before about like finding Bigfoot, and now I guess for the next generation would be the expedition Bigfoot. It did a lot of great things, in my opinion, in that it brought Sasquatch into everybody's home. It brought Bigfoot into the zeitgeist for everybody to
It's
feel
true.
okay with talking about, right? And I think that's a good thing in a lot of cases. But the other negative are plenty of the things that you talked about with the wood knocking. And again, a lot of that stuff was for television, right? You got to have something to do. And that's what I've talked about that on the show before. Like, what do you do when you're out looking for Bigfoot? If you can't yell in the woods and you can't beat on a tree, nobody's going to watch a show where somebody sits around for 12 hours in the dark and nothing happens, right? So they have to spice it up. So I get that point. But I do
But
agree with you.
is that spicing up now? Because almost all the shows kind of accept this. Now, you've been to Bigfoot conferences, right?
Oh, yeah.
So is wood knocking considered church, if you will?
Oh, yeah. There's plenty of people
Yeah.
that you talk to that will talk in definitives about tree structures. They'll talk in definitives about wood knocking. They'll talk about the vocalizations. And that's where I draw the line. And that's where I really have an issue with anybody, whether it be a television show or a researcher up giving a talk or coming on my show. I've said it plenty of times. Anybody who comes on and talks in definitives, I'm really, really weary of. And I try not to have those people on the show because everything we're talking about is subjective because we don't know. Well, a lot of people argue that they do know they exist because they've seen them. But for the rest of the world who have not, like myself and like you, who want to be believers and want to find answers to the question definitively, the rest of us need proof, right? But you can't talk in definitives about what you know that they do. And I hear that often, right? We'll get into a little bit of that. I think we're going to talk a little bit more about DNA. I certainly want to get into that before we move on to anything else. But when you start talking in definitives, my answer is always this: how do you know that? How have you proven this? What scientific research have you done? What controls did you put into place? How many times has this theory been tested and retested? And how do you come to that conclusion? And it's usually just, well, we've done it when we've been out researching. We know that they break sticks in this direction. It's a trail marker to let everybody know that they take this trail, and there's a secret trail on the left, and there's a secret trail if it's broken on the right. And that's
I know I
what
was watching one where they found the kill, and it was obviously a Bigfoot kill, Brian, don't you know? Because the bone of the deer was twisted and broke. It's not because the bear or the deer was maybe attacked by a cat or a bear and it rolled down the hill and it broke its leg. No, only Bigfoots can do that. Again, unless that's been an observed thing. That's why I go back to like Jane Goodall and Dr. Fossey, who literally lived with these things and observed and scientifically proved through the observation, re-observation, and re-observation again. And that where now that I listened to one of your recent shows about DNA gathering, if and I can trust those guys as knowing what they're talking about, on hunting Bigfoot, there was a DNA sample they were getting, and they're tweezering into this little envelope. Everybody's breathing on it. No one's got a mask. They took it to their DNA expert, who happens to be a Bigfoot researcher. I find that a little too close to the family. You need to take that outside. And I kept thinking, well, they got all these inconclusives, right? Why can't we just gather all those inconclusives together and, have them worked in a big pot? And then they were saying you can't do that because there's no control. There's you don't know how it was gathered, who gathered it, whether or not they're breathing on it, all the stuff that can transfer human DNA to it. So unless you got a control group and the same people, and they were talking about, they only have 3 guys that gather it, and they've got a procedure and I'm like, see, that's science. Not, oh, I see some hair on a tree. It's at 9 feet. That's got to be a Squatch because nothing else can get up that high.
Yeah, and you're talking about for folks who may not have heard, the show you're talking about aired, I think this past week. It was Justin and Jay from Cryptids of the Corn. And Justin is a field biologist, and he was talking about particularly eDNA samples that they were taking in these large areas. And very much like you said, they had to go to school for this. There is a lot of training involved in collection of DNA. It's not just I use tweezers, so everything's good because I didn't touch it. And yeah, you can't breathe on it because your breath, there's droplets of your DNA in your breath. If you breathe on a sample, it's done basically. And that's one of the things that you mentioned. Doug Hychek earlier. Doug was on a couple of weeks ago. He's doing the Sasquatch Legend Meets Science 2. The Kickstarter was fully funded. I think they hit it $85,000 or something. So
that's great.
Legend Meets Science 2 is coming, and they've got a lot of samples of DNA. I just posted a show as we talk today. It's Sunday. Jeff from Pine Island Research was on. Jeff has been on before and shared his encounter story, pretty compelling story, a couple of years ago on the show. And I had Jeff back recently because he's written a book about his experiences and some of his research. And a couple of the things that you mentioned, I jotted down some notes. The color blue came up in that. We'll talk a little bit about that. Jeff talked about his research. But we also talked about DNA because he's collected quite a few samples of what he believes to be the sebum, or that white chalky kind of oily substance that comes up. We have sebum ourselves. Human beings have it. All apes have it. If you've ever been and seen gorillas sometimes in the zoo, they'll have like these big golf ball sized like clumps of this stuff underneath their armpits. And it's basically this white oily sort of substance that they secrete naturally, feet and hands, those kind of things. And he put out part of what Jeff did with his research. If you guys listen to the show today, if not, you can go back and check it out. It's the Pine Island Incident Show. He talks about how he tried to do some research by thinking outside the box. He wasn't out taking cameras out. He wasn't out putting up trail cams. He wasn't beating on the trees and whooping and hollering. He and Doug came together. Doug Hychek and he got together and talked about some things that they could do to put out things that might interest a Sasquatch if they were in the area, and try to collect hair samples and pull some DNA from those. So Jeff started taking out like these bouncy balls that you get at Walmart for $2. And he would take them out and throw them in a field and play with them. He's 8 miles out. He's having a kayak out into the middle of nowhere, into these clearings, and he's playing with this ball and he's kicking it around and talking to it and laughing in case something's watching. And he leaves it. And in some cases it was moved. I think at one point it got moved 85 yards from where he left it. And he collected hair samples. They were using some material. I don't know if it was Velcro or what. In some cases he was doing these things, leaving them out and collecting hair samples. And he was collecting what looked like sebum off of this ball. And hopefully he's kind of going back and forth on whether they're going to test it during the Legend Meets Science documentary or if he may be doing it his own. He's doing another project. But I said all that to say, one of the things you mentioned is it being a little too close to home. And I know the way that Doug and Jeff are planning on taking his samples or whatever Doug has. They're doing it the right way, in my opinion. They're not going to a lab and saying, here's a check. We want you to test this and see if it's from a Bigfoot, right? At that point, you've lost all credibility, in my opinion. That's not the way to do it. If you're writing somebody a check and saying, I'd really like it if you'd find this. And oh, by the way, here's a check for 40 grand to do the test. You'd like to think that people wouldn't do it, but are they more likely to find what you're wanting them to look for versus, hey, we're just going to go and give you a sample. We're not going to tell you where it came from, what it is. We don't have any dog in the fight. We just want you to test it and tell us what happens. So that's sort of the approach to the DNA they're taking.
Well,
And I think it's the
yeah,
right
and that's
way.
a good approach because I do believe, and I say this as an outsider, I'm an armchair quarterback on this, but science, I think, has become a little lazy these days. Um, and they're trying to make their data fit what they want it to answer, what they're looking for, rather than leading it the other way. And I'll give you a quick example. A friend of mine, not granted, this is 25 years ago, local community college, taking physics, and there's this test where you take like a coin. It's a predetermined weighted coin used for experiments. So it's not like a quarter. So it's going to be absolutely perfect, supposedly. You're supposed to flip it X amount of times, and science will or physics will tell you, there's a certain percentage, whatever. Well, my friend wasn't getting that answer. And the guy's like, "Oh, don't worry about it because just write it down. It's fine. You should have got this." Wait, but I didn't get this. So that could mean there's an imperfection in this coin or what we're using. Oh, no, 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 no. It should come out this way. Just write it down. You'll pay. And so when you're doing that kind of stuff, um, that doesn't help. And then I wanted to say about the ball. When I listened to that, what I thought of, excuse me, there's a place out by Edwards Air Force Base, a little further out, called the Cat House. And it's not what you're thinking. It's a rescue for large cats that most likely were here illegally. Panthers, lions, tigers. Don't think there's any bears. Um, and a lot of peacocks. And you talk about things that can make weird and loud noises. I don't know if you've ever been around I don't know, a herd, a flock of seagull, or flock of these things, and they can leap. I mean, leap while their feathers coming out up on top of the buildings. But um, that'll get back to noise that we hear sometimes. But the big cats were playing with bowling balls. For some reason, they're fascinated with the ball. So I'm taking some of my when I get time to go back, some of my old bowling balls that don't use anymore, years old, and they play with them like they're toys. We lift 16 pounds. My wife's like, I can't throw this ball. They're like, and it's over there. So I tended to think of cats playing with that. And what was the name of the podcast again?
The one
That
that
those guys,
that
yeah,
Jeff was, it's
yeah.
called Bigfoot Pine Island. The Pine Island Incident is the name of the
No, no,
episode.
no, no, no. Yes, yes. But what was the name of their research group? Dixie. That wasn't Dixie Cryptid. Oh, was it
Oh,
Cryptics of the Corn?
the Cryptids of the Corn podcast. That was the guys that were
That's a
on.
great name.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say the props to that name. When I heard that, I'm like, that is awesome. That's it. Sometimes it's all in the name. You might be drawn. I was drawn to Sasquatch Odyssey. I'm like, oh, great logo. Yeah, I went there first before some of the other ones. So props to you also. Yeah, it's good stuff. Um, so let's, if we can, talk about noises a little bit because that's something on this really new episode of Finding Bigfoot. And of course, when she said she heard something, oh yeah, people hear like whispering and vocalizations all the time. All right, I have some first hand experience with something like that. I'm out in the middle of the desert in California, and we stopped at this abandoned gas station on the edge of the Mojave Preserve. I'm flying my drone, and there's tennis shoes thrown all over the place, over wires, over wherever they could get them to hang. And I thought I heard people whisper. I'm thinking I'm having a paranormal, thing happening to me right now in the middle of the day. Yell over to the cameraman from my show. We were just out there having fun. Hey, did you hear that? He's like, hear what? I said, come over here. We just stood there listening. He heard what sounded like whisperings. It's got to be the air movement through the shoes, through the building, what's left of it. I don't believe I was getting a message from the other side because nothing is very clear. And I've heard it now again somewhere else with a similar type of thing going on. I think that's just, how I don't know what the term is. I always forget it. The mind sees what it wants to see, right? We see in clouds, we see whatever, right? I don't think it's far off from hearing either. You want to believe Bigfoot's talking to you. You want to believe that they say, hey, yeah, or whatever it was all the time. I think this goes again to, I want to believe it. I heard something. It must be it. Versus, because if you really wanted to study that, you just sit down and start recording. And you do it again, and you do it again. You try to reproduce this. But I know it's TV too. They're there for a day or two, whatever they're doing. But they call themselves researchers. The hunting guys don't. They're just out there to bag one. Which really I'm 50-50 on. I think you need the body, and there it goes to the DNA. You got all this stuff. You eventually have to have something to compare it to, or you'll never get an answer. What are you going to do if you never have a body or the arm torn off one, or, something to drag back to you, or find the grave that they're supposedly buried in? How are you ever going to compare the DNA? All you'll get is unknown, humanoid, ape, whatever. That's
I definitely
all
want
you're
to
ever going to get.
Before we get into the DNA, I want to talk a little bit more
Yeah.
about the auditory stuff. And there's probably, I haven't looked it up. There's probably an auditory version of pareidolia that you were talking about, seeing what you want to see and hearing what you want to hear. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about, you brought up the Sierra Sounds, and I did that show recently. I had Ron Moorhead on again. We didn't really talk about the Sierra Sounds because we had done that before, but I had Scott Nelson, the crypto linguist, who broke down those sounds and spent months and months analyzing them. Well, it's been decades at this point. But here's the weird part that most people don't talk about, and it completely escapes me. I can't believe. I think it might have been. Oh, it was Jeff, actually, the one who from Pine Island Research. He does his own podcast, and it's called Pine Island Research. And he recently had, I believe, he had Ron Moorhead on, and Jeff had gotten sort of some inside information about the fact that there was more to the Sierra Sounds than what has been released. Because we know that there's hours, right? Because Ron sells these things. I think there's about 90 minutes or so that he has released out there in the zeitgeist. We all know the 3 or 4 minute compilations that you can look at on YouTube, and you can even hear some of them in the opening to my show. They're commonly used in the Bigfoot community, right? And a lot of researchers, to your point, do actually take the Sierra Sounds out. I've talked to researchers who have gotten a lot of alleged responses by playing those, kind of sound blasting those into the woods instead of doing their own calls. But it came out recently on Jeff's show. Ron Moorhead basically admitted that he has hours, and I'm throwing darts here, but I think it was something like another 18 hours of recordings that he has never released that is out there for the Sierra Sounds. So I don't know if anything's ever going to happen to those. I don't know if Ron's ever going to release them, or if anybody's going to ever get to see them or hear them, but they're out there, right? So there's even more out there in the zeitgeist for people to take a listen to and take a look at. But I agree with you with the sounds. I try to do that. If you approach this subject at all, we have heard really weird things here on our property. We've heard what sounds like Ohio howls in the distance. I've heard close vocalizations here near the property that have scared the crap out of me. I don't know what they are. I never have definitively said ever that it was Bigfoot. Could it be? Sure. Could there be a logical, natural explanation? Absolutely. You'll never hear me say anything definitive unless I know it for a fact. If I see something making that sound, then I'm going to tell you what I saw. But other than that, the definitives go out the window for me. But I think there is a lot of things that happen that people have these experiences on these shows, or researchers in general just out doing their thing, and they don't necessarily stop and think, because some people unfortunately get Bigfoot on the brain and everything becomes Bigfoot. And I don't think that does anybody a service. Honestly, I've said that plenty of times. If you make everything Bigfoot, then there's no room for anything else. There's no room for any discussions about what it could be or could not be. If it's just a definitive for you, then we really have nothing to talk about. As far as the DNA goes, you know, there's a lot out there. We've got the Melba Ketchum DNA study, I think in 2012 or something like that. She's back on the radar. I've reached out to Dr. Ketchum multiple times and invited her on the show to talk about her first study, talk about what she has going on now. And she has politely declined to come on the show. So you and I can have a little bit of that conversation, I guess, now without her. I was watching, she told me she wasn't doing any podcast interviews. And then I see at least 2 interviews that she did recently. And I was watching one of them, a 3-part series, just over the last couple of days. And I have to be honest, there's a lot there. I'm not a DNA expert. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a PhD. I'm not an expert on anything related to Bigfoot, right? All of my expertise is in law enforcement and other things that I've done previously in my life. I'm a half decent podcaster, so I can't even claim to be an expert podcaster, right? But what I do know is that a lot of people have a lot of issues with Dr. Ketchum's initial study. And I even heard her talking about on one of her recent podcast interviews that they made it through the first round of peer review, and then they didn't make it past the second round of peer review because some of the same ones who had passed it in the first round refused to either look at it again or take. And then they start snowballing, and she starts talking about government conspiracies, and it's the government's fault that they can't get this peer reviewed and they can't get it published. They had to buy this, it's just a whole thing, right? And now she's asking for more money and raising more money. And last time I looked, I think they were up to about $23,000 on her GoFundMe to do this Dogman DNA study. And the only thing that comes to mind outside of some of the many things that she said in interviews that I sort of scratch my head about it. And again, I would love to give her the opportunity to come on and talk about firsthand and maybe defend her position on the show. But without that, I'm only left to draw my own conclusions. And some of the things that she says is pretty out there because she talks in definitives about Sasquatch is absolutely 100% real. There are millions of them around the world. And in her first study, she's obviously did the mitochondrial DNA, and it's human female, and the unknown contributor for the male part of it. She thinks these things are genetically engineered. She doesn't think they're natural creatures. And same thing with Dogman, because she claims to have what she knows to be samples from Dogman that she can't wait to test. So there's a lot of definitives there, right? I know this, I know that, yet nothing has been proven scientifically outside of the fact that you tested DNA that had mitochondrial DNA was female, human female, and then something else. So that's all we really know. And back to your point, I said that was a long way to get there, but I said all that to say, to your point, that's the problem I have with anybody really testing DNA of some unknown species or cryptid, because without a comparison sample of a known entity, how do you ever say definitively that what you have is X and not something else, right? I just don't know where you
Right.
go from that with DNA.
And how do you know that, if you've got the mitochondrial Eve, if you will, and it's an unknown male contributor, I would guess that many scientists would say you've got a contaminated male portion of the DNA and leave it at that. But when you said it went through peer review, if I was reading it right, her first peer review was questioned because I think it's the de novo fiasco, it's called, because the group that was peer reviewing it was a group she started as a group to do the peer review. Are you familiar with that?
I have heard some rumblings about that, and when you sent that to me today, I sort of looked at it. What I've heard Dr. Ketchum say in the past is they eventually had to buy the entity, and I don't know, I can't, it's escaping me right now. I can't think of the word. I was trying to say the word earlier. The oh God, it's going to drive me crazy. They ended up having to buy the uh place where the review came from. Oh my God, I'm gonna have to. I'm sorry, folks. I'll have to Google
Okay.
it and put it in the
Like the
intro.
journal or
The journal,
whoever
yes,
was.
thank you. Oh my
Yeah.
God, I can't believe it's like complete brain fart. I could not, but they ended up having to buy the journal to eventually be able to get the peer reviews. They had to buy it because they wouldn't give them the peer reviews until they bought the journal. So a lot of people kind of throw that stone, and I don't necessarily think that's accurate because it was a separate entity when the peer review started. And then when they didn't get passed or they refused to do the second round, they ended up purchasing the journal just to, according to Dr. Ketchum, get access to all of the material that they refused to release. So they just bought it. And a lot of people say, it's kind of hinky. You can't own the same thing that is supposed to be a separate entity that's keeping you honest, so to speak. But I don't think that's necessarily accurate. I think it was the way that she said they had to buy the journal after the fact. But let's just lay all of that aside and just go back again to, like you said, her answer to that. I've heard that. Everybody says it's contamination. No, it's not contamination. We have proof it's not contamination. None of the samples were contaminated. Okay, well, I haven't seen the proof. It may exist. I mean, she claims a lot of stuff's on her website. I haven't read through all of that. So if it's there, so be it. I'll take a look at it. But just saying something doesn't necessarily make it true, right? So how are these samples collected? If she didn't go out and collect these samples herself, and unless you have a really good chain of custody, it's very difficult to say definitively that there was not a chance for some contamination. Maybe it didn't get contaminated by her or her people or in the lab, but what about before it got to you? So, and again, we're talking about Bigfoot and DNA. We're talking about dogman DNA. We're talking about things that aren't supposed to exist. Yet she's very definitive in the fact that they do because she claims she proved it with her first round of studies with the genome project and the Bigfoot DNA and the hair samples. They've supposedly got hair samples from these things. And she says that Sasquatch hair doesn't produce DNA in the shaft like every other mammal on mammal on Earth. It does in the shaft, or it does in the root, but not in the hair shaft itself. And she says that's unique to Sasquatch. Again, how do you know that?
Convenient and very
Right.
convenient.
Exactly.
Well,
So there's
let me
just a
ask you
lot.
something. Sorry, we're talking over each other. Um, when you were in the force, were they collecting DNA yet?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
left there in
Okay.
2016. So
Okay. All right. So yeah, fairly new. If I understand DNA collection somewhat, even a smidge correctly, um, the people who are collecting are also in the database, so they can separate them. This is known, and just in case they do contaminate it, and anybody who may have been in, let's say, a murder room, they'd walked into the room. Let's say you were the responding officer. Either your DNA is on file, or they might take a sample for you because you were initially there, not knowing what you're coming into. You could have possibly, left cells contaminated the scene. They want to eliminate you. That is somewhat how that works today in modern police work, right?
it's possible we didn't do that as a
Oh, you,
department.
you don't.
So
Okay,
I
I've
don't know
heard
about the
that,
folks.
and I'm
Yeah.
not 100% sure. Um, but yeah, again, if she doesn't know, well, I don't know if you saw this, and I didn't put it in my notes, but it's still up here in my computer. She was sued because of testimony she gave in a animal DNA case. And I believe the way I read it, sometimes reading these uh, court stuff is, it's all legalese. But apparently, her place, I believe, was not licensed to do these kind of things and give opinions on them in court. It was out of Texas. You can look it up. There's a whole case. If I've got the right, I doubt if there's a lot of veterinarian DNA checkers in Texas. I think that's where she's at, right? Or the case was in. I don't remember. The case was in Texas, but um, so there's some kind of history, if you will, following her around. And the de novo thing seemed kind of squirrely, and like you said, they had to buy it to get an answer, which almost seems like a pay to play type of thing. And I don't want to malign her. Well, like I've been doing, almost seems like I'm doing all night here, but it raises questions on credibility, and she may be totally sincere. But again, like I say, if you don't have a sample to compare to, and Sasquatch, I can get behind far more than Dogman. Mixture of Dogman, right? This you might as well have centaurs and mermaids. It just that goes into the ancient alien theory with hybrids and mixing. It's like if she believes Bigfoot was engineered by whom? Is this now going into the alien side of the Bigfoot myth? Um,
Well, here's the
you
thing.
got to say, well, who's engineering it?
From what I've heard her say, she believes that Bigfoot is a hybrid. She believes that Dogman is a hybrid. And she claims to know exactly what both are and where they come from. But that's only going to come out after the new study's done.
Yeah,
And again, that's one of the issues that I really have here is if you're in this, in my opinion, for the right reasons, and you're trying to bring answers to the subject, why is it that you're holding out this information? I mean, she did this study in 2012. And if you have all this definitive information about Bigfoot, why didn't it come out then? Why hasn't it come out in the last 11 years or so? Why do we have to wait for another round of funding? Why do you have to do more testing on what you claim to be Dogman DNA and go back and take a look at some other stuff as far as the Bigfoot DNA is concerned, and then you're going to give us all the answers? I don't like that kind of situation, because if you're a scientist and you're doing this for the scientific reasons that you say you are, just give us the information. Just put the information out there for everybody to see. What's in it for holding it for over a decade and then having to raise another round of funding to go do more DNA testing on some other cryptid to then say, oh, well, now I can tell you what Bigfoot is, and I'll also tell you what Dogman is, but only after we complete our funding. Like that, it
yeah.
just
You would
doesn't
think you
make
would
sense.
narrow in if she could prove one, say Bigfoot, and I mean, if it was proved 100%, even 98, I think some people would be like, oh wow, this is, we got to be looking into this. Then move on, and people are going to give you funding if you can prove the one. Let's not mix it all together. Even the guy that was raising the money for this second documentary, um, he teased a little bit like that too. I can't tell you. Other people have been jumping in on my research or trying to beat me to this, beat me. I mean, even that sometimes I was like, not again. How many times have I watched a UFO show or a Bigfoot show? Bobo was describing his 25-year ago of his first sighting through a night vision scope. That could be a guy in a ghillie suit. I mean, seriously, at the distance he was at, he's trying to give perspective on size. He doesn't know. He didn't go down there to see what the size of the trees or the bushes and whatever. I really, I've looked through night vision scopes. It's good, but and especially 25 years ago, not like the guys have today in the field. I've even taken photos on my digital SLR through a night scope and got a halfway decent photo. But could you tell me what antelope that was I was shooting or what deer I was shooting? No, but a basic shape of a type of animal. Well, when Bigfoot and man are kind of close, except for maybe the length of the arms and the descriptions, they always talk about the neck goes into the shoulders. Well, how do they know that? If they're so covered with hair, how do they know there's no neck there? Because it's just, I mean, I've seen some guys with some pretty big hair and long hair, big beards. I can't see their neck. I can make the same claim on a good old boy down south getting gators. I mean, it's not to throw aspersions at you guys in the South, but It's a lot of these things aren't definitive enough, and you can't reproduce it. This is what it drives me crazy is, like you say, the absolutes, and with the DNA thing, I absolutely got it, but there's no proof. I mean, could you imagine the mark you'd make on history? I mean, did Jane Goodall wait for 20 years before she released her information? Did Dr. Fossey, because I can't remember her first, Diane, maybe, um, wait to release information? I mean, she's writing it down, she's getting it out. Um, it just doesn't make sense. Now, she might have waited a year or two, but we're talking, how long has this been? 2012. So we're at 11 years. I know science isn't fast. I know DNA isn't fast, but it's getting faster and faster where they can get stuff quickly. What what is taking so long?
Yeah,
It,
I
it,
agree.
it drives
I
me a
agree.
little crazy.
And again, I hope that she's able to do this, and I hope she's
Oh,
able to
it'd be
prove the
awesome.
species. It'd be
Yeah.
awesome. But I think what it does, in my opinion, is, my show is all about encounters. And I've said it so many times recently. I've gotten a little perturbed with people who have come on the show and made some really fantastical claims, because here's the thing. If you come on my show and you share your encounter story, nobody's going to beat you up. It's not what it's about. I don't have people on the show that don't believe they experience what they experience. And people want to hear those stories. And I believe that those stories are data to be put into the database, and we can draw from
Hmm.
and make our own conclusions. And nobody who comes on my show and says, I had an experience where this thing walked up and did XYZ, or it came across the road while I was driving by, or whatever the case may be. Anybody, I could go out tomorrow. Greg, you could go out tomorrow and have a very similar experience with something you can't explain, right? But I tell you, when
Hmm.
you have these fantastical claims, and again, not to go, I will go back to Dr. Ketchum one last time. In this recent interview, she was going on with the person who was interviewing her about all these experiences she's had with Bigfoot and the things that they've left her on her property and how they've torn up her pecan trees. And she's interacted with a clan of 10 that she's seen multiple times. And I'm like, where is the evidence for any of this? And of course, she says, I have evidence, I have pictures, and I have all these things that they've given me, and that'll come out later. I'll put that out later. And again, it's just one of those things where the more fantastical the claims that you're making, if you're one of these people that are saying, I can take you out and show you 10 Bigfoot tomorrow, and I know every one of their names, and I've grown up with them, and I've watched them birth their children, and we have this fantastic relationship, and yet you present no evidence to corroborate what you're saying. My question to you is, where is it? Why is there no evidence, right? And everybody has an experience, and everybody has their reasons behind it. I've heard Dr. Ketchum say, I don't take cameras out in the woods. That's not what I do, that kind of thing. Conveniently, there's no evidence to corroborate these fantastical claims. And I just,
And quite honestly, as a scientist, why wouldn't you?
yeah, that was my other, if you're just Joe Schmo who's going out to, enjoy some time in the woods, and maybe you don't have your cell phone with you and you have an experience, okay, I can let that slide. But if you're a scientist and you want to be taken seriously as a scientist and approach this scientifically, I think you have to do something and put a good faith foot forward to say, I'm at least going to present something. Because I think if you did that and you don't just talk in all these absolutes and I know this for a fact kind of thing, people would tend to take you a little bit more seriously. And I think that's, at the end of the day, that's sort of the rub for me with most all of this stuff, outside of the anecdotal experiences. And again, there's some of those that are really fantastical that, I scratch my head and I say, gosh, that's kind of difficult to believe. But if it is your experience, then that's what it is. But when you go into this, habituation, and I know this for a fact, there's a clan of 10 of them that visit the property, and oh, by the way, I've got all their DNA and I know exactly where they came from, and they're hybrids and they're engineered by whomever, alluding to maybe it's ancient aliens or whatever the case may be, that has far greater technology than we've ever had, that kind of thing. I think is how she's put it.
Yeah.
You just kind of lose me there in the weeds, because
Yeah.
there are people out, and you put Dr. Meldrum on your notes, and I'll bring Dr. Meldrum up. There's a lot of people who have issues with him for whatever reason. They don't necessarily agree with his synopsis on whatever. But I've talked to the man a couple of times, and he knows his stuff. He is a PhD. He studies human and bipedal locomotion, and he can break down the morphology of anything's foot. If it's bipedal, he can break it down for you case by case. And I have talked to him about the Patterson-Gimlin film, for example, and that he has examined those cast of those footprints that were taken that day, because it's not just the film, it is the casting of the feet as well. And he said it on my show. I am as certain as if I were standing on that sandbar when that film was made, that is a real Sasquatch walking across that, based on what I have examined in the morphology of that particular animal's foot. That's a very scientific approach for me. He doesn't say that lightly, and he can back it up with the science of why. He can take a skeleton of a foot, and break it down for you and talk through that. That is a scientific approach to this. And he has staked his claims on it for years, and he's put himself out there for it. He has been beaten up. He almost lost tenure because of it. And he continues to go around to this very day and defend his position on anything you ask him about. He'll defend his position scientifically and give a reason. And if he can't, he'll say, I can't. But anybody that claims to be a scientist and doesn't approach it the same way that Meldrum does, I tend not to listen to the same way that I listen to. You know what I'm saying?
I'm with you there. And I've seen him over the years, and, on a lot of different types of shows. And he does bring that air of scientific knowledge. It's like my light just went out. He backs it up with, you do put this on YouTube too, right?
I do.
Yeah, so I probably shouldn't light myself back up here. They're LED chargeable ones. A new one that I've been trying out. Okay. To me, that gives some credibility. He's not conveniently living in a place where they're presenting themselves to him, and he's also a researcher. That's where some of the credibility with some others that we've been talking about, how convenient is that? People are bringing stuff to him. He'll go out and research, but he breaks it down. Now, I think unjustly, Dr. Ketchum has been criticized because her PhD is in veterinary sciences. It's still a fucking PhD, and you don't get that lightly. And it's still backed with science, and there's still anatomy. There's still a lot of things that most of us will be, So that gives her, to me, credibility. Whether or not she's a research scientist, that's something else. And there are those who that's all they do is they research. They never go in the field. They just get numbers. They look at data. I prefer the person that gets dirty, gets out there and looks and touches. That's my kind of scientist guy. So I got to give her, I think, props on that. Not everybody gets one lightly, but I do find some of the things convenient. They're in my backyard. You had a great UFO show on your other one, paranormal one, Long Drive. I'm listening. I thought, this is great. I'm really believing it. And then this woman made a big left turn. And I think I emailed you once before, and that's where these stories are compelling. But then sometimes they break that air of maybe you're so close, and then whoop, government conspiracy, and that's not that those aren't out there, and sometimes are real. But that's when when you base a lot of your findings on that, and then I have to hide certain things. One thing, I don't know if it's your show, somebody was saying that the government knows what it is. They've got them. It's, well, quite honestly, the government can't tell me what the weather is going to be tomorrow, but yet they want to tell us what global warming is going to be like in 20 years, whatever. They've been wrong for the last 20, 30 years. And I'm supposed to believe that they know Bigfoot's here, or they're following them, or they're doing whatever. That's when I lose a little bit of credibility. The government's not always a big bad boogeyman that knows everything. I mean, quite honestly, I think half the government doesn't even know what the other half is doing most of the time. They're so disconnected. They're so, confuse themselves sometimes. So, yeah, can we talk about some of the funny names that Bigfoots are called? I found three. There's more. The wood booger. When I heard this the other day, is out of Virginia, not far up the road from you. Have you ever heard that term before? Wood boogers.
Yes, I have.
what do you what do you call Sasquatch in North Carolina? Is it just Sasquatch?
Yeah, everybody says Sasquatch or Bigfoot here.
Okay, okay, and of course Yeti, Sasquatch, those are Bigfoot is kind of the normal thing. But when I heard wood boogers, I started to break up laughing. I'm like, I'm typing that into my notes. Wood, how do you spell wood boogers? It's one of the funniest things. Now, there's something I really want to talk about. Let me knock some of these out. We still got the list. I've been checking them off. Um, and then some of this goes back to Finding Bigfoot, but it carries again into a lot of the other shows. And I go back. I mean, my first time I think I saw the PG film was on the Leonard Nimoy show, In Search of, and then we had Chariot of the God movies when I was a kid. A lot of this stuff that I'm like, this is really cool. Don't know if it's real, but this is cool. Loch Ness, all this. But some of the stuff I've heard across some of these programs, Bigfoots are attracted to women.
I've
Why?
heard that. I've heard that.
What evidence? Or they raves. They're going to do a rave because they know Bigfoot's attracted to it, or they're going to shoot off the fireworks because they're curious people. They're going to come in and look. Quite honestly, if I was a wild ape man, I think I'd be going as far away from big explosions and crap like that, personally. Um, but the one thing I've heard on multiple shows now is proof of the PG film, and to disprove the guy that came and said, I wore the costume, I'm the guy that walked, I made the impressions, is that Planet of the Apes, which came out in 68 or not, probably filmed in 68, I think it came out in 69, that was the epitome of costume design. And they couldn't do what was in the PG film. But that's a pretty broad statement because one, the film wasn't intending to make a Bigfoot. They were intending to really vary from the original book. If you've ever read Planet of the Apes, um, to look kind of like us, but apes. They're in societies. They're wearing clothes. Of course, it doesn't look like that. They're making more of a. I mean, their faces are very similar to chimpanzees and gorillas, orangutans. But of course, like I mentioned earlier, the Bigfoot look like about the eyes are the only thing you see, and everything else is big fur. So to say they couldn't do it, also you go to the second film, there's a sauna scene, which is kind of hilarious on the thought of them sitting in a sauna. The Most people probably have never seen either one of these first two films in their entirety. They've probably seen them on TV because most of the people I hear talking about them, they're in their 20s. I saw the first one in the theater only because we were seeing the second one. A little too young to see I'm 63. Parents probably would, what would I known it 3 or 4 years later, right? But the time the next one came out, and then I love these films. I really don't think I didn't know for years because I didn't remember. There's a scene, there's a hunting scene in the first one where they've got humans, men, hanging by their feet, hanging across, carrying them on sticks, like they've been out on a hunt. They're taking pictures with their kills. That's always been edited out of the TV version. I've never seen it in a TV version. So I think there's a lot of assumptions here, and the assumption that they couldn't make this costume, and I 100% disagree. I know there's a guy, and he was on this Finding Bigfoot show in the 50th anniversary, or whatever, who's done some research on the film. He took a few frames. I guess there was only 3 known copies, first generation copies. I thought the wife still had the original because I couldn't even tell you what show. Some research guy that got permission to go to her house. He built a rig for his camera and duplicated the film frame by frame. Because most of what most of us have seen has been duplicates of duplicates of duplicates, very degenerated film. And if anybody doesn't get it because they've never had the experience duplicating VHS or film and how it can degrade copy after copy, especially when you copy the copy. Go see Multiplicity with the original Batman. That'll tell you what happens when you get multiple copies down the road, right? And that film looked entirely different once I saw a first generation copy done in high. He did it on a digital SLR, so it was a much higher resolution than the original film. But this guy says, "Oh wow, we found a fourth first generation copy in a bunch of boxes that was in his stuff or something like that." I forgot the exact details. So he's doing what essentially is HDR, what now your phone does or your TV does by software. And photography, I used to do it by multiple exposing off of a tripod at different levels. You combine it like in Photoshop or something, and you can get the really lows and the highs. You blend them all together, and essentially that's what he did with a couple frames of the film and the image of, I forgot what they call her because they're assuming she's a female because some saggy mams, which maybe the guy's just out of shape. I don't know. Maybe he needs a man's ear. And it looked 100% better. Still grainy, but it made the edges pop out. It was kind of cool to see. But did it really change anything? No. Some of the things they say they see, like musculature, stuff like that, I don't know. The film is great, but sometimes I wonder, is that a suit? I really do. I want to believe it's real. I sincerely want to believe it's real. But something in the back of my mind says no. But I'm like 98%, yeah, I'm going to accept it. But I can't accept what these youngins are saying that Hollywood couldn't have done that suit, because I really think they could. Now, would these two have the budget or known anybody that could make that suit for them? No, because anything you would have bought off the shelf would have looked like that stupid gorilla and not down. What was that movie with? Oh crap! You talking about brain fart? Eddie Murphy. Trading Places, right? Remember the gorilla at the end? It's like really bad costume on Jim Belushi. That's about all that was commercially available. So the thought that these guys could get a hold of something at that level that's pretty slim. So that gives me a little bit more credibility. But I can't believe that they write this off based off a sci-fi film that wasn't intending to try to give that kind of texture and stuff. But if you go look at the one where they're in the sauna, I mean, you can kind of tell there's a chest plate for this part where there's no hair on it. Yeah, you could kind of tell it's a leg going in. Maybe, he's wearing a pant that's hairy, but it could have been, if they needed to go to a higher level, there was no need to in those films. I mean, their face makeup was enough, as outstanding. Anyways, I just want to get that out there because I've heard 3 shows, I think, lately mention using Planet of the Apes movie as a definitive reason to prove the PG film, and I don't think you can do that.
Yeah, I agree. I've heard that.
Those guys had rifles. They should have shot the damn thing right there and ended the discussion back then. Yeah, I hate to say it, but our sensibilities of hunting were a little different than it is today. If you would have shot it, it would have been done.
Well, there's a whole nother rabbit hole we could go down. I think MK Davis has claimed that there was a massacre that day, but we're not going to go into that tonight for sure.
I have not heard that one. Wow.
You'll have to, maybe we'll have to come back and talk about that at some point in time. But I agree with you, man. I think I'm about, it's 50-50 for me sometimes on the Patterson-Gimlin film. Sometimes I'm 80-20. I want to believe more than anything in the world, but there's something that just has been gnawing that says, oh man.
Is it the lizard brain going,
It could be the guy in the suit. I don't know. But the mystery continues. There's obviously a lot of things that piss us off about Bigfoot, but we keep coming back to the well. And we definitely addressed a lot of those tonight. And I'm sure that people are going to listen to this and probably say, yeah, I've had some of the same issues with some of this stuff. It's one of those things where I'm with you. I think it's going to take a body that somebody's going to drag in and say definitively, here's one. Science, go to town, figure out what it is. They'll probably want 2 to make sure, just to finalize that this is what it's supposed to be, whatever. But at the end of the day, I think we all keep coming back because it's a fascinating subject, and I really
It
want the
is. It
answers.
really is.
I really want the
Yeah.
answers, and
Just
I'd
think.
love to go ahead.
I'm sorry. I forget if this cuts each other off. I'm just gonna, get excited and responding. But um, just think one of your revenues of income would go away if it was proved. I mean, quite honestly, there's an industry. Nothing against your podcast, because I love it. But there is an industry to keep this mystery alive. I mean, look, I've got the T-shirts. I showed you what I got for my birthday. Um, very cool sculpture of Bigfoot. I love the genre is so fun and cool because it is believable. It's not so Dogman to me is not half man, half. Uh, I can't get into that one. Um, I'm more. I could go down Skinwalkers because there's a mystery paranormal thing about it. I could get more down that line, but the hybrids, can't really go there. But to me, I don't look as Bigfoot as necessarily having to be a hybrid. It could be like what mammoth is to elephant, a human to an ape to giant or giant pithecus. I think that one is. I think it's believable, and there's so much out there. And like, oh, I think I started. I didn't finish it. Us say suburbia dwellers who never get beyond maybe 100 miles of their home have never seen how vast and wild and open this country is. It's amazing. Easily, I think it could hold a small population. I don't know. The Bigfoot guys, the BFRO thinks there's 2 to 6,000 in North America. And again, what do you base that off of? Where's the science behind that? I just want to know. I mean, if you can give me a definitive, real reason why I should believe why electronics don't work around them, why they like girls, why they like a rave, I'd be all in on it. And I might even go meet you up there. I'd love, quite honestly, I'd like to go squatching, but I don't think my 38's going to protect me from the cougar, the bear. There's so much out there that I'm not equipped and never been trained to handle or be aware of what to look for. You know, living in a place like you do on the edge of the woods might creep me out a little bit. Like I say, you hear weird noises. Yeah, it's a scary world out there. You live kind of on the edge of it.
Definitely, man. Well, as always, Greg, it's been great, man. Greg from the American
Thanks.
Landscape. You guys go check it out on YouTube. He's got some great stuff over there, and we'll certainly have to have you back for more discussions, man. It's always good.
Sounds good. I'd love to.
They say